Okay, welcome everyone. This afternoon it's beautiful weather, so we thought it's good to be here in Utrecht, in the city of Utrecht. Very welcome to Shirtli Werner, my esteemed colleague from Israel. And we just realized that we've only met 10 years ago, I think. Ooh, let's not talk about time today. But anyway, very welcome with your daughter, and glad that you could join us live because we were talking about the pandemic. And the pandemic has brought forward many nasty things, but a good thing, and that is that we now are used to hybrid meetings. And we have a hybrid meeting today. So very welcome to those that join us online. I know that many of you would have loved to come here, but for some reason or another weren't able to come. So very welcome to join us online, and please post your comments or questions in the chat. It will be moderated by Leo Cardinal. And why do I mention his name specifically? Because he has his birthday today. So very happy birthday to you, Leo, from here in Utrecht. And yeah, and so I would stop talking now because I'm so happy that you could make it to the Netherlands. Yeah, Shirley. And yeah, we know that you are very knowledgeable about stigma and disability. You wrote one of the most cited books, I think, in our field about it, together with Katrina Skior from the UK. And more recently, you have dived in several, how do you say that? Branches of stigma, including associative and family stigma. Yeah, so we are curious to hear from you, and Shirley will have the floor for the first hour approximately. Then we will have a small break just to relax, stretch, or whatever you want to do for 5 minutes, and then we will come back and we'll have a debate or discussion or whatever. It's informal, so don't feel shy. There are no stupid questions, etc. So Shirley, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
Alice, the presentation will be available afterwards. Will the presentation
The PowerPoint itself?
Yeah.
I can send it over, yes.
Move the chat just a little bit closer, the one with the microphone. Just move it towards the
To
middle
move
of the
it.
room.
Okay, so I hope I'm not challenged by technology. Thanks, Alice, and thanks for having me, because for me it's a great opportunity to come. I came with the middle daughter. I'm debating always, you present the professional or you present the family, but in my life story, the professional and the family, it's very well mixed. So by professional background, I am a social worker, and also when I was working, nowadays I don't work as an active social worker, but when I was working as a social worker, I've always worked in the disability field. Then comes my personal life. Of course, everything is tied in. I have 3 kids. With me today here is my middle daughter, that she also has a disability, so everything ties in for me. And when I think about stigma and I think about all the research I do in the disability fields, of course it has to loop back to myself and to my family and to everyone that I am familiar with. And when we're talking about what is stigma, how do we make stigma stop, what are the implications of stigma? So these are some of the things that I will be speaking about. What do I want to do? I assume that all of you here and people who are watching online may be coming from different places, so I want to make sure that we're speaking the same language. So I want to do a bit of a brief definitions, what I mean by stigma, what do I mean by family stigma, what do I mean by self-stigma, because when we speak about stigma, there are different types of stigma, and I want to get those defined. I want to speak very briefly, what does this mean? What are the consequences once there is stigma out there? What does it mean for people with disabilities and families? I want to speak a bit about what can we do, but this is especially, I want to tie it into the few studies that I will be presenting in terms of, because of the consequences of stigma, some of the things that get hurt along the way is the participation of people with disabilities and many times also participation of family members, and also aspects of identity. So these are the two things that I will be mainly showing in the studies I chose to talk about. I have a lot of studies here on the presentations, but I put two that I understand from Alice might be more relevant. If time allows, we'll go to the other ones, and if not, we'll stop there. So when we speak about stigma, there are a lot of types of stigma. Public stigma, structural stigma, self-stigma, professional stigma, family stigma. But I put public stigma at the front and define this one first because at the end of it, everything, for me at least, starts with the public stigma and with the structural stigma. I will later define self, but it's important for me to first go from this one because the other aspects of self-stigma, for example, rely on the fact that there is public stigma. It doesn't come from nowhere, it comes from somewhere. So when we talk about public stigma, this is the way the general public, so any public that is out there, reacts to people with disabilities. And there are three components within this public stigma: stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. And it's not only that these are the three components of public stigma, but it's actually more of a process. So it starts from the stereotypes, goes through the prejudice, and ends up in discrimination. So stigma many times talks about this entire process. It's not enough just to know that there are stereotypes. For stigma to occur, it's the entire process. So the stereotypes, it's the cognitive structures, what we all know about people with disabilities. Might be true, might not be true, but these are the things we have in mind, and everyone in the public is mostly aware of this. The prejudice might be the feeling that arises out of it, and the discrimination is the behavioral reaction. So just as an example, if I take the group of people with psychiatric or mental illness, and I take this group because many of the stigma theories come a lot from the mental illness field, and mental illness today, until today, is always the most discriminated of the disabilities. So many times a stereotype might be that people with mental illness are dangerous. Then the prejudice might be, if someone is dangerous, I'm scared. And if I'm scared, the discrimination would be, I'm not going to be hiring someone with a mental illness. I might move to the other side of the street, and all the discrimination aspects of this. So people grow up, and people are aware of these different stereotypes. And we see them on TV, and we see commercials, and we hear things out in the streets, and most people are aware of stereotypes. And then when someone, him or herself, has a disability, and this is what Link defined out there in end of the 1980s as the modified labeling theory, it's, wait, now I have a disability, but I know that they said that someone with a disability is dangerous, and I know that they said someone with a disability is irresponsible, and now I know that I have a disability. What does this mean about me? So this brings us to the self-stigma, which is the other type of stigma. And this is when people are endorsing these negative stereotypes about themselves now. So it's internalized. And it's the same thing, it's the same process with the stereotypes, the prejudice and discriminations, but now it's about myself. So, if I know that someone will probably not hire me, I'm probably not going to go out and look for a job because I know what the end result or the outcome might be. So the self-stigma is where the person, him or herself, is. And then Patrick Corrigan, who is one of the most leading researchers in mental illness stigma, he comes up with what he calls the why try effect. So the why try, basically, as it sounds, if I expect something bad to happen, so why should I try? Right? Why would I go out, look for a job? Why would I go out and try to find myself an apartment? So it starts with the part here where there is the stereotypes that I just spoke about that lead to public stigma. And it continues to the right, because most people are aware of these stereotypes. Then they take these stereotypes upon themselves and internalize them, which leads, of course, to reduced self-esteem and reduced self-efficacy. And this is a why try, So once I have reduced self-esteem, reduced self-efficacy, I might not go out and try to pursue different goals in life, might not go out and try to find a job, try to find gainful employment. Maybe I will not go out to find a life partner, anything else like this. But the other possibility of this, of course, might be, wait, I don't agree with this. I'm aware that there are stereotypes out there, but I don't agree with them. I don't think this is what happens and what frames people with disabilities. And I want to put a question mark on this, and I don't want to internalize this stigma. And I might go out and do some self-advocacy, and I might go out and speak out about myself. And I go and I'll try to, and this is where I would actually go into empowerment, and I want to participate in different activities, and I want to be out there, and I want to be a part of everything that happens out there. So this is the other possibility where I escape the stigma. Another type of stigma, and I will be I'm bringing both of them because I will be presenting one study on family stigma and another that relates to self. So I'm putting both of them out there. And family stigma is what happens to family members of someone who has a disability. So many times the stigma has the characteristics of expanding, and it's not only about the person with disability, it might be about the family, it might be blame upon the mother, maybe this happened because you didn't do this or that, or maybe you didn't go and have an examination during pregnancy, or different types of ways we can blame the family. And this also happens, and this is called family stigma. And another aspect of family stigma that is frequently called affiliate stigma is when the family internalizes. So, if I'm to blame, then I'm not worthy. My self-esteem as a family member goes down. So there are all these different types of stigmas happening together. So naturally, when this happens and when someone is faced with stigma, if someone is marginalized in society, someone is not provided with the same opportunities as their friend or their peers that are non-disabled, it might lead to lower well-being, anxiety, depression. This is in the person with the disabled person, but also among family members, this might also occur. And I also want to tie this in because self-stigma ties in many times with identity. If I'm not worthy, and if I can't participate in various activities that my maybe schoolmates, friends participate in, what does this mean about myself? Is my identity entirely an identity of someone who is disabled? Is the disability maybe one part of my identity and I have other aspects of my identity? What does this mean about me in terms of developing my identity? And I could possibly take it to the other side of this. I sort of present two extremes, not extremes, but one on the one hand, what might happen is for me to, and this is mainly possible when the disability is non-visible, try to save face, try to present myself as someone who is non-disabled, try to sort of pass by, maybe if no one can recognize I have a disability, I don't want to be a part of this group, I'll try to present myself as someone who is non-disabled. But the other pride is that disability identity also comes with pride. And maybe I want to say, yes, yes, I am disabled. I do have a disability. This is a part of me. This is part of who I am, and this might also represent pride in who I am and part of my identity. And these are some people that might be taking place in collective action and taking place in advocacy and trying to say, this is who I am. And this might be another way of trying to empower myself, trying to raise more positive self-esteem. This is actually, Katrina mentioned before, in 2006, me and my colleague Katrina Sior from UCL came out with a book on intellectual disability stigma. It's an edited book, so actually my task was easy because I just collect the chapters and put them all together, write a bit of here and there. But we do have a chapter there about tackling stigma. What do we need to do to change stigma and tackle stigma? So the first two things here come from the CRPD, the Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And I just took two articles, two things from there that for me tie very well together. One, naturally, that we have to fight stigma. We have to combat stigma, we have to combat stereotypes. So this is one thing that we must do. Another thing that is stated there, and for me they tie in together because I think they work well together, people with disabilities have the right to effective and full participation and inclusion in society. And for me, the two things tie together. Just the other day, I had to give a podcast about stigma, and the guy was telling me, how do we change it? And for me, of course, there are things to do to change stigma, but it also starts from the beginning. We just have to allow people with disabilities to be part of everything from the day they are born. And then you don't have to change, and you don't have to fight, and you don't have to change because from the beginning it should not be a part of the life, the stigma. So people with disabilities must be part of a society in every aspect. And we have this circular type of presentation. I'm not going to go into all of them, but what I want to say is that to combat stigma, some of the things that need to be done are at the intrapersonal level. This goes in terms of self-stigma. So if someone has internalized stigma, what can we do with this individual to try to speak about this? To try maybe to put some question marks, If you internalize this, why? What happened? What types of things might you have heard from other people? What does this mean? And try to be able to change even the reality base. Where is this information coming from? So this is on the intrapersonal level, focus on the individual and to help them change the negative consequences of stigma. And the interpersonal level is the combination of people with disabilities and people without disabilities. So this comes, and this is why for me the two things work together, this comes from participation. When people with and people without disabilities meet each other, speak to each other, are together in every place, this might be another means of changing stigma. Together with this is a theory that came a very, very long time ago, the social role valorization, and for me it ties in this. Because people complete many different social roles. So one role might be a role of a person with a disability. This is a role in life as well. But when I can adapt to myself and add other, I can say I'm also a mother, I'm also a student, I'm also an athlete, I'm also, whatever gives you meaning in life, this adds many aspects to your personality, to your life, to your characteristics, and to self-value and meaning in life. And I put this here because many of the studies that I did tried to see how we can look at a person's identity and how might we tie it in with different tasks and different ways and meanings that people place in their lives. So this is just to put it all together in terms of a bit of a theory. And I want to go into two studies, mainly. The first one begins with family stigma. This is a study I did with two, and you can stop. I know that we have also a discussion, but if there is any specific question or if I'm not clear, you can, of course, stop me at any point. So this is a study I did with two master's students, The names are here, and you can see who were the master students that participated. Both of these students were interested in family stigma. Both of these master students come from Arab ethnicity in Israel. They're all both from Arab culture, and both of them were working with families of children with disabilities. And frequently, we know that within a minority ethnic group, as in Israel, the Arab society is the largest minority ethnic groups, naturally, a lot of times stigma ties in with other identities. So when someone might have a disability and also belongs to a minority ethnic group, they might be even more stigmatized. Together with this, these two students wanted to know what happens to the participation of the children with disabilities. And this also ties in because, on the one hand, participation of children, all children, not specifically with disabilities within the Arab minority, is a little bit lower than it is. There are less opportunities, fewer opportunities for participation, for community participation within the Arab minority group. So what happens now when these children are not only from the Arab minority, but there is some intersectionality between being from Arab minority and being a child with a disability. So they wanted to know actually this association between family stigma and possible participation of the kids with disabilities. I'm going to be showing a couple of slides that have some of the charts, but it's mainly, I hope it's not too messy, it's mainly for myself to remember what I want to guide you through. So if you don't understand anything from the slides, I'm going to be speaking about this. So I did say Arabs that are the largest ethnic minority group in Israel. And one thing that we wanted to see, this is family stigma. Does this also point, or no? Does it make it? No. So we wanted to see, is family stigma, which is right here, possibly associated with the children participation? And what we expected to see, naturally, is that families that feel that there is more stigma towards them, their children would be participating less in community activities. So this is hobbies, this is going to the cinema, this is going out shopping, any types of community activities that can take place. The other thing we hypothesized was that we were thinking that the participation of the parents themselves might be a mediator between this family stigma and child participation. What does this mean? We were thinking that parents who might feel more stigmatized might themselves feel marginalized and take a step back. They might themselves participate less in society and less in community. And this might be associated with less participation because many times, of course, the family unit is together, or the parents need to advocate for their children to go out and participate. And it might be the case that those parents that participate less, their children may also participate less in the community. So this was one thing we wanted to see. The other thing we wanted to see was a moderation effect between family stigma and participation by perception of disability. Perception of disability means, how do I explain the source or the cause of disability? When we're speaking about the cause or the source of what disability actually is, there are two, I want to say that there are competing explanations, but many times we can hold on to both explanations. It's not either or. One explanation is what is called the individual model of disability. The individual model of disability mainly says that disability is a tragedy, disability is inherent in the individual, disability is tied into impairment. So the individual has a specific impairment, and this, according to the individual model, might be the reason for them participating less in society or taking less because, according to the individual model, the impairment itself might be the reason for the individual to have difficulty in taking part in society. But a competing explanation is what is called the social model of disability. Actually, even should be models because there are several different social models. For simplicity's sake, I'm trying to put it into one, but there are different models out there. And this model says, it's not. Some people have impairments, okay, this is objective, this is something we know, but this is not the reason that people are marginalized in society. What happens, according to the social model, which obviously is the one that, I see myself in, it's mainly because of society's responsibility and what society does or doesn't do. So putting very, very simply, if I'm a wheelchair user and there are steps all over the way, it's not because of my impairment that I can't participate, it's because of the steps that society placed them there, right? So society comes in, takes out the steps, I will be able to participate. So according to the social model, there are different forces that are coming. They can be historical forces, political agendas, many different structural forces, and this might be the reason that hinders participation from people. That's okay. Yeah. So we wanted to see if the way these parents perceive disability might moderate the association between family stigma and their children's participation. These two students that held this study, they had a bit more than 160 parents of children from the Arab community. The parents were participating. They were providing information about themselves and they were providing information about their kids, but the participants themselves are the parents. And the children are very, very varied group. There were a lot of children there that had a hearing impairment, intellectual disability, autism. We weren't able, because it was only 160 parents altogether, it wasn't possible for us to differentiate between the different types of disabilities. And I'm sure there might be variations in participation between different types, but we didn't do this in this study. We looked at all of the parents as one group and the children from aged 5 to 18. And the parents completed a questionnaire that included information about the children's participation, the parents' participation, family stigma, do they feel that they're stigmatized from others in society, etc. So this is what we find. We find that family stigma, these are the red lines going up there, family stigma was associated with the parents' participation. So the more that families felt that they are themselves stigmatized, that they are themselves marginalized by people in society, they participated less frequently and their participation was lower. The parents' own participation. So parents were going out less to coffee shops and going out less to various groups. So they were feeling less participation when they were stigmatized. And we also see that you might not see the negative sign that's there on the other side for some reason, but this is a negative association. And what we see that when the parents themselves participate less frequently, the children also participate less frequently. So it might be various explanations about this. Might also be something of a characteristic, when in families in which the parents participate less, it might be that their children naturally participate less. Maybe some of the activities are also family type of activities, so if the parents don't go, children also are not going. But it might also be for children to be participating, something, especially for the younger children, but I think also for the older children, parents have some sort of responsibility or need to be active many times, especially when services are not out there, especially when there might be not enough possibilities out there. The parents have to be active to find these places for their children to go out and participate. And when I have other studies that are not, I didn't bring them today, But I have other studies about services in Israel for people with disabilities in the Arab ethnic community, and we know that services are worse than they are in the Jewish community in Israel. And some might be dispersed, and some you might have to go searching for them in a farther place. So naturally, when you are a parent and you're yourself not really participating too much, not going out to the cinema, not going out to the shopping center, you might try to protect your child and also not go out. You might fear that your child may face stigma, and if you face stigma yourself, you might fear and want to protect your child for them not to be experiencing the same thing, and you might think, if I take a step back and they don't participate, they might not be hearing negative things from others out there. So this might also be sort of a protective gesture on the side of the parents. The other thing that we did find in the study, as we expected, is that the way the parents perceived disability, the explanation that they gave to this disability, moderated this association between family stigma and participation. This becomes clear in this slide. The dotted line, the one that's almost straight, the dotted line, are parents who held a strong perception of the social model of disability. So these are these parents that felt society is responsible for placing disabilities. And the straight line, not the dotted line, are parents that perceive this less. They did not have such a strong feeling that society is responsible for disability. And what we see is that, among these parents that do not feel that society is the one responsible, the more stigma, the lower the involvement of the child. And for those parents that feel that society is responsible for stigma, it's almost a straight line. There's actually no correlation there between stigma and the child's participation. So these parents might say, it's not my child's disability, it's not the impairment itself, it's the role of society, and I'm going to be fighting there for society to find these places where my child can go out and where my child can participate, and they might need to have the accessibility needs met. And of course, naturally, accessibility needs are not very well met in the Arab ethnic minority group, very unfortunately. But this might be the voice of many of these parents to try to say, wait, stop. It's not my child's impairment. It is society's responsibility, and I hope and I advocate for society to make place for my child to participate. So if I put all of this together, and I also, by the way, I've placed along the presentation, and I can send this to you, the various articles that we've written. So if you want to go deeper into the results of any of this, you can feel free. This one is under review right now. It wasn't published yet, but I can send you what we have. So parents who feel or fear that they might be marginalized by society naturally might try to protect their children. They take a step back, they withdraw. So on the one hand, they might feel that this is protecting their child. The child doesn't have to face people who might be discriminating or might not need to hear bad things stated about them. But of course, they're paying the price of their child not being a full and equal and part of the community, and the child is not taking part in the community as much as they possibly could. And when the parents face this stigma, they might withdraw themselves from participation. And together with this, they're also withdrawing their child from participation. So this is the other thing that happens. And the third point, which I think is very important, because this is also something that we might be able to do when we speak to families and when we speak to people with disabilities. Still, we see that many families and many people with disabilities still hold an individual, personal, tragic perspective to disability. And if we can speak to families, and if we can advocate, and if we can say, wait, this is not the entire story, you know. There are other stories to be told. It's true that objectively your child has this type of impairment or that type, but all of these children are part of society. How can we paint and try to work with these parents to state sort of a different story, you know? Society should be made for all. How do we advocate for this? And this is where we see indeed that those parents that feel that society is responsible are also participating more, and their children are participating more. So can I still hear? I'm speaking fast or slow or?
No, it's fine.
Okay. So I'm taking you in an entire different story, entire different study, different story. This was a study that we did with Beit Easy Shapiro. That's also on here. Beit Easy Shapiro, it's a place in Israel. They have a kindergarten, they have school for children with special needs, and they have many, many different projects. And one of the projects that they've had for years, they call it the special university, and it's been working, must be more than 10 years.
Maybe one question about the last research.
Yes.
How do you have done it? Do you have interview people or observe people? Or
No, it's a questionnaire. It's a questionnaire that they filled. It's quite an experience to fill out the questionnaire, and I didn't bring here, because you know I have to impress you, I didn't bring all the limitations of the study. But there were a lot of limitations in the study. One big limitation was the fact that it was a master's level study. So the two students that were doing it had to do the study and finish. And then comes COVID, and no one is participating because, you know, everyone is shut down. So it has nothing to do with disability and nothing to do with Arab ethnicity, because everyone is shut down at least equally shut down. Like, it brought about a lot of equality. And we had a lot of thoughts because we had to go out with the study. They had to finish their research. And they held off with data collection as much as possible until Israel was a bit more out of the big lockdown, and people did start going a little bit back into regular routine. So it might be maybe that in general times might be a little bit more participation, but this is also why I didn't really bring in the levels of participation, but the associations, which I assume would be there in any case. The other big limitation that we had in data collection, some of the children were children with hearing impairment. There were a lot of different disabilities, but one group were children with hearing impairments. And for these children, many of the parents were also hearing impaired. And we find that this specific group had a lot of difficulty completing a questionnaire. So we actually had a translator who translated the questionnaire to the hearing impaired parents. But the rest of the parents completed the handwritten questionnaire.
Can you say that you only focus on Arab people or
Yes.
also Jewish?
No.
And Jewish is
No.
something like worse or better?
I have from different studies that I have done, not in this specific study, it was only Arab parents. In a different study that I had, we did have a comparison group between Arab and Jewish parents. It was a study that had to do with services, and we saw that there are a lot fewer services for Arab families.
Okay. Did it come later on?
No, it was it was an earlier study that we did. Other questions on this prior study, or do you want to debating what you want? Do you want to leave it to the other side?
Go on and we can debate later on. Yeah.
Okay. So Beit Easy Shapiro, over 12 years ago, started what they called the Special University. And this was like a 2-year course that was for students with disabilities. And it was a 2-year course that they participated in. And it was like a first taste or a flavor of what it means to be a student. but it's also, I could say, a segregated course because it was only a course for students with disabilities. A little bit later on, they decide to go on this project. They call it academic friending. And in this academic friending course, they provide an opportunity for students with disabilities to go and take a course with students who are non-disabled. And it was in this specific year that I was carrying out the study. There were 10 courses, 10 different courses. The courses were specifically built to be academic friending courses. And Easy Shapiro was responsible for recruiting the students with disabilities. It was very various type of courses. So it's not courses that were usually in the routine. It was in occupational therapy school and special education university program. But these courses came in. They weren't part of the original program. And there were some thoughts placed behind of what types of courses might be best to be academic friendly. For example, there was a theater course, and there was a sign language course, and there was a video therapy course. So these are the type of courses that were there. And in this academic friending program, about 20-some students per course. Half of the students were students that were in the regular routine at the university, and the other half of the students were students from Beit Easy Shapiro, students with disabilities that came into these courses. And then came Beit Easy Shapiro and JDC Israel, and they asked me that they wanted to evaluate these courses. They wanted to make some sort of evaluation. Especially, they wanted to see if it was possible that participation in these types of courses brought about increased self-esteem in the students with disabilities. So this was one question that they set up, and they also wanted to see if participation in these courses reduced stigma on the side of the non-disabled students. And they asked me to carry out this study. I don't have here on the slide, so I will tell you this, because it was a mixed method study. Part of it was a quantitative questionnaire, and part of it was a qualitative interviews that we did. We did interviews with the teachers, we did interviews with students with disabilities and students without disabilities that were in the course. And in the quantitative part of the study, we wanted to see change. So we had a questionnaire when they just on the first session of the course, and we had a questionnaire at the end of the course. The one very disappointing, I might say, finding from the study, we wanted to see that there would be change in stigma. That stigma before in the first session among the students who are non-disabled might be higher, and at the end of the course might be lower. And we actually didn't find this. We didn't find any change between the first and the last session of the class. It remained the same. However, it remained the same, but in both instances, it was very low. So one of the things I would expect when you're going to occupational therapy students, special education students, most likely many of them are not going to admit to high levels of stigma even in the first sessions. So what happens, it was a ceiling effect. All of them were, from a 5-point scale, they were at the 5. Yes, wonderful. Yeah, hip, hip, people with disabilities coming to our course. Hip, hip, hooray, we're so happy. So there was nowhere really to improve. But I doubt that these were, it wasn't all pink. It wasn't all pink, and throughout the entire course, it wasn't all pink, and there were also difficulties. And afterwards, for example, the non-disabled students would say, we have a course project to do. And at the end of the day, it was me and my other non-disabled friends that were taking part in this course project because we get a grade at the end of the course. They don't get a grade. They had other things to do and they were participating less in getting the project done. So it was not all pink, okay? It wasn't all pink. There were things happening there. But in terms of, this is why I always like to add qualitative aspects to my study, because if I would be presenting just the quantitative and saying, nothing changed, but I really don't think that nothing changed. I think we didn't see it in the numbers. So just a bit of background to this study in terms of theoretically, the right to education, it's also out there at in the Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, that of course people with disabilities have a right to higher education just like anyone else. However, there is a very big lack of opportunities, at least in Israel. I don't know, in many other places, many other places I think might be similar, but there are really a lack of enough opportunities for disabled people for higher education. And this was where this academic friending course came in. They wanted to provide an experience for people with disabilities, how it might be like for them to take part in an academic course, and through this course bring about mutual contact between the disabled and the non-disabled students that are part of this class. I mentioned the classes that were there, and I think the classes that were taught are very important to select the correct classes for this. I came in and I was making an observation, for example, in the sign language class. So this was really interesting class to see, because both students with disabilities and students without disabilities were equally had no knowledge in sign language. So like you come at the same place, and I think this is one thing that is important when your knowledge for a specific field is at the same place, and not one group have more knowledge than the other group. If you're coming to a special education class and you teach them about Freud and inclusion, these special education students should have known a thing or two before. But when you choose a topic that you can come at an equal level to the course, it brings a lot more flavor.
Can I ask one question? If I understood you correctly, the participation of the students was not equal in the sense that the one group got graded and the other not. So how, I think, is this not also now you're talking about the content of the course, that it should be at the same level, but the stakes are not the same for the people involved. Or am I not correct?
You're very much correct. You're very, very much correct. And I think this was, of course, some of the feedback that you got from the course, because, if you want to have us come into the room as equal members of whatever is happening inside, this should be equal in all other parameters. The university students, of course, get credit for the course, but I think there's many other ways to get credit for a course, and it doesn't have to be with getting graded and getting a score at the end. There can be a lot of other ways for people to get a course credit. But really one of the limitations that I think happen in these specific courses, and I think it's an opportunity to learn how maybe to do it, take the good things and see also how to improve from it, was really that the 4 credit students had something to lose if they were not active participation and if they were not getting a good score.
So then, yeah, because so was this course, was it more geared toward the non-disabled or to the for me it's like a little bit unclear to whom this course, what is the result for either group or?
So the course was geared towards making a meeting between them, okay? To have the opportunity for you to be, especially when you talk, I think, by the way, this is another thing to consider. I think it was natural that these courses happen in occupational therapy, special education schools, because it might be a natural place for this. But I don't think this should be the case. You can have at the School of Engineering a course like this. There is no real reason to put it at the School of Occupational Therapy, besides the fact that, occupational therapy are very nice students and will naturally maybe have the other students join, but it might be.
Yeah, but it could be, it could be just the other way around, because when you're in occupational therapy, sometimes there are people who think of people with a disability as somebody to take care of. It's clients or not like real people that are equal to you in some sense. So maybe it's also got a bias that you should care for those people, but actually you're still in equal uh, mindset.
I totally agree. One of the things we were thinking, and for me it's not fair on my part because I only came in as an evaluator, so I was not involved in building the framework. So it's easy for me, to come from the outside and say, yeah, this worked, this didn't work. But there are, of course, a lot of people here that are emotionally involved in the various places that were taking place. But this was indeed one thing that they were thinking. Should I bring this course to first-year students before they're socialized into being professionals? They've just come in, it was the first year, and they should be meeting people as people before being socialized, to be, you're now an occupational therapy perspective. Or should we bring this course in the final year of school? You've already learned about these people as clients. How can you now see them as partners? It was something that was a lot of thought placed into it. I don't think there is one good solution, but I agree with the dilemmas that come in. Very much agree.
Yeah, because what I know about like stigma, decrease of stigma, there's one of these theories who has the contact hypothesis,
yes.
And then one of the conditions is that it should be completely equal and should be positive, that sort of stuff.
Yes.
So there's evidence for.
I agree, and we know from the contact theory that it says that contact should be made on an equal basis when you have equal aims to go out to. And I have other studies that I'm not going to be having the time to show them, but I think this is one of the things that is trickiest, because in both this study that I have, it's not equal contact. For me, it doesn't matter how you turn it around, and you can try to better this aspect or that aspect. It's not going to be equal contact. And we try to make it as much as we can. There is another study that I'm not going to be having the time to go through it that has to do with participation of soldiers with intellectual disability in the Israeli military. And of course, you can try to have, but no matter how you flip it, it's not going to be equal contact between the soldier with intellectual disability and the other soldiers in the unit. And I think this is something that we have to solve, and how to make the equal contact. Also, just to see, there are different people, and it's okay to have a wide variety of people. So in this part of the study, there are 66 participants who are students with disabilities, so it's non-credit students. They're only coming to this course. This was in the 2016-2017 school year, but it repeats. The program still takes place today. And the other thing that is important, I think, is not all of these students, it was actually their first time. They might have taken a different course the previous year or before that year. So it's also not their first meeting actually at the university. And for some of the students, and it's also a question in terms of credit, they're saying, this is annoying already, because I go in and I have this non-for-credit course, and I have this non-for-credit course, and I keep on being this non-for-credit student who is only visiting and coming, and it's nice, and I have a taste of this and a taste of that, and it's nice to learn sign language, but at the end of the day, I don't have really anything, of being a student. And but this is, I also want to say that it's a development, because after this project, it continued a development of students that are going in, are getting credit and getting university degrees. So try to see it as a development of the programs. So this was a qualitative. I told you there are two parts. There was a quantitative questionnaire that I'm not showing the results, but I spoke to you a bit about them. And these are some of the qualitative results that came through. And also, I'm not going to be showing all of them, but mainly focusing on these two, which is the experience that these students had when they met the students without disabilities and the experience they had and how they felt their self-esteem by participating in this university program. So I said it's not all going to be, daffodils and pink. There's going to be a bit of this, a bit of that. Some of the students told us that the experience of them being out there and meeting students that don't have disabilities provided them with a feeling that they were like everyone else. They were a part of a system, that everyone was in this system. So they were saying people with disabilities are capable. This can be seen by us sitting here at the academy and bonding with supposedly normal students. There in class, you don't get labeled by your disability. You're a regular person. Or another student that said, it was really nice to get to know new students, especially because they didn't judge us. They accepted us the way we are, and they wanted to get to know us better. So these are some of the experiences. They spoke a lot about having these shared assignments, and we spoke about the downfall side. But there was also an upside of the fact that because most of these courses, it was not individual, you do your assignment and you hand it in, but it was a group type course. This had an upside. For example, in the one course that dealt with the videos, they very naturally divided. If they had a group of 4 and 5, you're better at thinking what we might video, you're better at editing, you're better at whatever. So very naturally they might have split the tasks between them, and they also knew that they have a joint task to be working towards. So this was very important. And meeting accessibility needs, it might seem obvious, but it actually was not. The students were coming in and suddenly seeing that there was no place for their wheelchair, or that there was no accessibility needs for when they needed larger print. It wasn't all really set there very, very clearly. And of course, many times things can work or fall on these accessibility needs. And very interestingly, and this is also, I think, a question, and we might debate on it as well, some of the non-disabled students had no idea they were entering a class that half of the people were going to be people with disabilities. They just thought, they signed up, this looks interesting, sign language, great, I want to learn sign language. They had no idea they were going to be entering a class with people with disabilities. And I'm leaving this maybe for our next talk, when we can think about dilemmas. And it was a question of, do I prepare before? Should I not prepare? I'm not preparing you that you're going to be having a student or whatever, Argentinian student. I'm not going to prepare you that an Argentinian student is going to be coming in. So do I prepare you for the fact that there are going to be students with disabilities or not? Question. But in any case, in many of the courses, there was no preparation. And the students with disabilities were saying this. There should be an introductory meeting between all the students. When I first came to class, it was really difficult for me. The students without disabilities were surprised by the way we look. If there was an introductory meeting, it would have been easier for both sides. The students without disabilities who host us, which is also an interesting word, I think, they host us, they had no idea about the friending course or about the fact that the university integrated us in it. They were in shock. Sometimes I felt like they don't want us to be there. I think that even before the course begins, it's important to prepare all the students.
May I ask a question? From the overview of the participants, I had the impression that in every course it was about a few people.
It was half and half.
Oh, it was half and half. Okay, that changes a little bit this picture. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is also a point to debate, if it should be half and half, it should be a few students here and there.
Or 50-50, yeah.
So the students were also saying that the experience of learning in the academia raised their self-esteem. They felt that they had an academic achievement, and they loved the encounter that they had with the non-disabled students. which of course feels opposite of what we just heard, but I think it's fine to put on the map that they had different types of experiences. It felt so good to be a student at the academy and to get a diploma. They say this student says a diploma, they actually just mean at the end of the course they printed out some sort of, a certificate. It's not really a diploma or something they can go with, but it had a lot of meaning for them, this certificate. This diploma is proof that I made it. I achieved my goal and I figured out my disability won't prevent me from doing things. I can be like everyone else. This course made me feel good and let me find out that I am equal. No one is interested in my disability. I felt like everyone else. So when I put this together, and it's actually a lot similar in the next studies that I'm not going to be speaking about, but the same things come across in terms of the soldiers being integrated in the military. And I have another about athletes in Special Olympics. The same things come across in terms of what it means to be included. The fact that when I'm included and I can participate gives me a feeling that I'm capable and I can be a part of this. And it brings me with the feeling that I'm an equal member and an equal participant in this specific setting, whatever the setting might be. Not for everyone, it might not be university. Some might be included in a different setting. For each what works and might raise my self-esteem to be a part of this.
Can I ask one critical question?
Mm-hmm.
Because you said that the non-disabled students got credit for it and sometimes felt like they had done more work than the others. So is it not, on the one hand, what I find with the people with disabilities, sometimes they get not like credited on the same level as other people. So that I find it doesn't, I'm not clear, I think.
Not yet, but
No, because
you're on your way.
yeah, because the other people, everybody got this, that they finished this course, but some people with disability did less actually, but so it's not equal in that sense also. I find it a bit difficult because then you actually
I
diploma.
think
So you get actually, and that's what I find sometimes also very difficult when people have this very high self-esteem that they could do something, for instance, but it's not
real.
it's in some sense not real. It's not. They have not been held to the same standards as the rest of the people, and this also gives also a wrong self-image in some sense, because they always get applauded for things that are completely normal for other people to do, like, oh nice, you have been on the streets, or it's also kind of yeah. Yeah, but it's the same
But
like
maybe for we are having a small break in a few minutes.
Okay, so
So
this is
maybe
actually,
you can
I have
finish
one
with
more slide of the,
yeah, okay.
to tie it all in, and then we take this out to our break.
Yeah.
So if I'm putting all of this together, we know that there is public stigma out there. We know, I didn't speak a lot about structural stigma and I didn't define it, but a lot of this comes in terms of also structural stigma. If we talk about university, of course, there is a lot of structural stigma. You have to have this and this score to go in, and if you don't hold to that score, you are not able to go in. So there is also a lot of structural stigma, and both of these lead to reduced opportunities for participation from people with disabilities. But once people do participate, we can see the positive impact of this. We can see the positive roles and the positive identities that people gain from participation in whatever it is. I think that there's the same opportunities that are provided to each one of us should be the opportunities in my mind for people with disabilities. One might want to go to academia, one might want to go to a different leisure activity, whatever there is. Participation brings about reduced labeling, but I might also put a question mark about this, and we can take it out to the discussion afterwards. To enhance self-esteem, and we see how the social role valorization theory also comes in, because when I can tell about myself and come home, a lot of these students with a lot of these that used to be students participate with us today on research and might say, I am now able to go to Friday night Shabbat dinner with my family and also say that I went to a course and I studied and I did something else and I can provide meaning and talk about something in our dinner. So this ties it in. Other ways.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jane,
So we have a chat question here.
maybe Jane, is that important before the break?
It was asked just now, so I'm not sure if we should answer now or after the break.
Yeah, maybe we can have a small break first, and then we have questions. And because of that we have a hybrid meeting, if you want to pose a question, so you can prepare yourself during the break. That's why I bring it up now. Then we will have a few chairs here, and then you are being asked to come here because otherwise you won't be heard for the people that are online. Yeah? So this is a kind of stage then.
I can remove this, right?
So we have a 5-minute break and coming back
That's
in
short.
yeah.
That's short.
That's
It
very
is short. Okay, at a quarter. So at how do you say that? 15 to 4, or otherwise phrased 3:45. Yeah.
We resume at 3:45.
Yeah, we resume at 3:45.
Shut the door. Okay.
To resume already, Jane, or are you about to? Okay. Right. Thank you. So here we are again. Thank you. Hopefully you back at home have had or at the office do have had a wonderful short break as well. We are here at least with 2 other people next to Shirley and up to to ask a question to you or starting a debate. And we have at least one from the audience that Jane will bring forward. So let's start maybe with Mogus. You are another guest of us these weeks and you are from Ethiopia. So maybe shortly introduce yourself and then pose your question or debating point to Professor Shirley.
Yeah, thank you very much. As Dr. Ali said, my name is Mogas Wobe from Ethiopia.
Speak up.
Okay, okay, good. My name is Mogas Wobe from Ethiopia. I'm working on the family-based intervention intervention for the improvement of those persons affected by disability or by different type of diseases. Just the family-based intervention will improve the family quality of life. This is just our research area. My question for Professor Shirley, thank you very much for your nice presentation and informative. The participation of the parent is less. The participation of the children also is very less. My first question is just who is the disabled, the parent or the children?
The children.
The children.
The children. In a few instances, the parents also had a disability, but not in most of them.
Okay, good. What approaches or methods do you think that this problem alleviates such kind of problems?
What do you mean? What can be done
Yeah.
to improve?
Yeah.
It's a good question. I think what can be done to improve. I think a lot of things need to be done to improve. Specifically thinking about the Arab minor ethnicity group in Israel, I think in general there should be more opportunities for participation for people with disabilities across the board. I think it has to do with leisure activities that are not always inclusive of people with disabilities. Going out to the cinema, there is not always the opportunity for people with disabilities to be there. So I think on the one hand, there should be more opportunities out there. And on the other hand, together with this, there should be conversation also with parents of how to make use of these opportunities. Sometimes we know of things that happen when there are opportunities, but families don't partake in them and don't use the available opportunities. So I think it's a two-way street. It's also putting front more opportunities, but it's also endorsing them and having people use these opportunities that are available. But I also think that there should be a conversation with families, what are the needs? What types of opportunities do you feel are missing? Maybe there might be, for example, a leisure center that is accessible for motor disability. I'm just giving an example, but the only thing offered in the leisure center is ceramics. But you don't want a ceramics course, you want to take a theater course, and the other place is not accessible. And sometimes you're limited by your needs, but not because this is your preference. So I think there should also be some sort of a mapping. What are the things you wish to partake in, and then being able to put these out and use them.
Do you think that just this has a difference in developed countries and in developing countries?
Definitely. I want to say that Israel, of course, is a developed country, but in many things, I think we're still learning, and in many things, there are still ways that we need to take. And sometimes it might be more difficult to correct things. Once you have things built up in a certain manner, it's a lot more difficult to correct them than starting up front and building things in a way. And I'm saying building in terms of physical, but I mean, not just physical. The mindset that you're coming in. And I think when you're still developing, maybe it's also an opportunity to, from the get-go, what type of perspective or glasses you're using in starting to develop things.
Kind of a blessing in disguise, you mean? And I see you nodding, Mogus, so do you recognize
just
that?
I think the approach may be different in developed countries and in developing countries. For me, for the developing countries, one source of just less participation of the family, less participation of the disabled person is just due to lack of the knowledge. One, they have the right to participate. On the other hand, also, pupils may think that just if one individual is disabled, cannot able to do things by their own. But that's not true in my view. The disabled person has disability on a specific aspect, but it has an ability to do things. So for me, one is just due to lack of knowledge for themselves about the nature of the disability. The other also, the lack of knowledge of pupils or the community towards to the disabled people.
Right.
If we are just teaching, if we are creating awareness for them, maybe it improves the participation of the family as well as the disabled person. So that's why we are just thinking, teaching of the family and the disabled person how they escape out from this marginalization, stigmatization.
Right.
The source of the stigma in my thinking, one, they may think pupils that uh, the cause of this disability may be transmit to the others. This may be one source of the stigma.
Is that the affiliated stigma?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Go on. Sorry, I interrupted
Yeah.
you.
For me, education is the basic thing for especially in developing countries, because lack of awareness is the source of the stigma, the discrimination, the participation, and the like. Yeah.
Right, I agree with you, and I think if we take it also a step further, when I started my presentation, I started with the notion of public stigma, because I think, and I agree with what you say, that it's not enough to work with the families and not enough to work with the disabled person if at the end of the day they go out and will not have the same opportunities. So if someone, for example, wants to go out for some sort of leisure activity, but they will hit a wall, or someone say, you know, you can't participate at our center because you're not able to. So of course we also have to make changes in terms of how others perceive this individual and how others perceive, and to have these real opportunities out there.
I feel like, Leora, misschien wil je even hier. My stand is not loud enough. No, my voice is not loud enough. So what I was thinking, you were telling about that, like education is one of the solutions. You are talking about participation as one of the solutions. But I think in some sense I feel that's very naive, because women are also participating. We are educated about gender equality, and still it's not equal. So I think maybe there are some other things lacking there, but I don't know how you think about that.
Maybe for me, my question.
Maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit. I forgot to ask you to do so.
Okay.
My name is Mark Koning, and I work at the UvA for disability studies. With a couple of researchers as co-researcher from person with disability, with university people. Yeah, I'm looking about your motivation about why disability, because when I've heard Israel, you have inderdaad Hebrew people, Arabic, some yeah, all kind of difference. So for the people, I think this is also a disability. The other group, Jerusalem, have also a Jewish part and an Arabic part. So what is your motivation? What are you see more at the under laag under
Under
the what's under the surface. So what is underpinning everything? I think all types of stigma.
Yeah.
yes.
And maybe the intersectionality.
Yes, that's what I think. I think when we speak about stigma, and also when we speak about identity, we always have to look at the intersectionality of the various identities. So if disability is one identity of the individual, and it's intersecting with gender and intersecting with ethnicity and intersecting with many other identities. I might feel an identity related to the place I live in, and different services might be available in one place and not available in another place, and different opportunities might be available I was speaking just yesterday to a friend of mine who moved to Holland, and she wants to take her boy to dancing classes. And she's very happy that she's here, because she says probably she will be able to take him to dancing classes here, because if she would have been in Israel, someone might open an eye of, you know, a boy going to dancing classes. Doesn't happen too often. So it's different experiences that you get in different parts of the world, and I think to really be able, and Leora, this might also tie in with the question you asked, I don't think there is really one solution, because I think you have to map what is the life story, what are the opportunities that are available for a specific individual. For me, but I might be overly optimistic or overly pessimistic, depending on how you look at it, the perspective. But I really wish that things could change from the beginning, from the beginning of things, and what happens, especially in Israel, and it might not be here. For example, we see many children with disabilities that are included in kindergartens, and many kindergartens that are able to include children with disabilities. But as they grow older, the opportunities decrease. So elementary school students are included. Secondary school, fewer students are included. High school, fewer students are included. University, it's like a decrease all the time in the opportunities that are available. And possibly also because on the one hand, I think it's sort of like, the older you grow, the more your objective capabilities might not allow you to participate. But I think when that happens, the more opportunities and supports that should be brought in to be able to allow this participation. And I think it's okay, not everyone must go into university, and not everyone must go here or there, but everyone must have the chances that they wish to have. And it's not always out there.
Yeah, thank you so
you.
much. Is that an answer to the reply to your? Yeah. Jane, you have something there from the chat?
Volker, I'm gonna come close.
Yeah.
If you hear me.
Please
Shall I,
Yeah, you can. Is there anybody else that wants to ask?
This is the only question from the chat we have for the moment, I think, unless Leo sends me some more. Allow me for a second. The distinction between disabled and non-disabled students sounds quite binary. There must be levels of disability, asked by Froke Hermans.
Okay. I think it's, I totally, I like this question. I like this question because, again, it kicks into the issue of identity. The distinction we did in this study was very binary distinction. There were students who were studying for credit, labeled for us the non-disabled group. There were students that came from our program, labeled the students that, this sounds really bad, okay, but this was really the distinction that is there. Of course, there can be people in the universities, they have dyslexia, learning disabilities, mental illness, here, whatever. There can be a wide degree. I think it is also interesting. We also had in some of the courses, some of the lecturers that had a disability. So the lecturer in the sign language class was a lecturer with a hearing impairment. There were lecturers in other classes that were using wheelchair users or whatever. There were various. I think it kicks in to be more interesting because when you come in and the issue with the fact that many of the courses did not have a preparation, you also see the lecturer that he's in a wheelchair. Is he one of the students? Is he not one of the students? It's a big mix, and I agree with you. It was a very binary distinction, and what happens when people who have been so-called labeled the students with the disabilities meet other students who have not been labeled but actually sitting in the same class and also do have a disability. And it's an opportunity also maybe to see people as a role model or someone who might look at differently. But it's true. And now that the question is brought up, I don't love this binary distinction.
Well, that's the only online question we have for the moment, so I shall return back to my seat behind the curtain.
Yeah, there are other questions here, so no problem, Jane. You can change chairs.
I would like to ask something more, to know something more about stigma itself. You use the word stigma like it's one thing, but I think there are all kinds of stigma to all different kinds of people, so different. Did you measure that in one of these two studies?
Well, stigma has various components, and we can see different things. First, are the different types of stigma in terms of, is it public stigma, is it structural stigma, is it family stigma, is it professional stigma? In these specific studies, I only did, in the first one, it was a family stigma scale. In the second one, it was two scales, the students, which I didn't show, but the disabled students that completed a self-stigma scale, and the non-disabled students that completed a public stigma scale, what they feel of people. But of course, each one of these scales is made up of various items, and the various items might tag into different types of reactions and different types of opinions. But at the end of it, this is one of the limitations of the quantitative study, where you get a general score that basically goes into if it's a family stigma, what is the overall feeling of family stigma. But it's possible to go back into the individual items. We did this at the very beginning just as a descriptive, but afterwards it's the downfall of a mean score of all of it together.
Yeah, so that's also why you you didn't you took in the first study, you took all the different kinds of disabilities together, and so there's no way to distinguish between stigma towards different kinds of disabilities.
Right. The one thing we did do, because some of the groups of children with disabilities that we had in the first studies were relatively small, but the one group that was a bit larger than the other groups were the kids with hearing impairment. So this is the only group we did compare the kids with hearing impairments to the rest of the groups. And we saw that the kids with hearing impairments were participating a little bit more than kids with other disabilities. But this was the only distinction that we did do, because the other groups were relatively smaller. And so of course it's a bit dirty of one group that has hearing impairments and the other groups that are composed of various disabilities. But it's also an interesting thing to see why the kids that have hearing impairment are able to participate more than the kids with autism, intellectual disabilities, physical.
Could you tell more? Did you find out what was the difference?
I'm not sure. I can hypothesize, and I think that for the one thing, I think there are a lot of hearing impairments in there, the ethnicity group, because of different genetics and things like this. So, and I also think the other thing that happens frequently in hearing impaired group, that there is a lot of that is a larger community, and many times hearing impaired people have their own deaf culture and deaf
so
community.
So it's not within society, but in their in-group participation was more than in, because I was wondering, but now I understand, because if you measure also in-group participation, that's completely different for deaf people with other people.
Right, right. I think that's also a question when we think, like ideologically a question. When we think about inclusion and participation, do we want just an in-group, or do we want a general participation with the rest of the peers, and what does this mean? And I think it's okay to, I think both are okay. I think it's okay to expect, your own in-group and to be participating with your peers that are also hearing impaired, and I think it's also okay to...
And was there also difference that in the hearing impaired group you mentioned for one moment that there are also parents?
Some parents.
So that you have the same disability within the family, which also might influence the way you look at yourself.
I think so.
Was it also the same for other groups, or was it this an
I think the hearing impaired group was the group that had more hearing impaired parents. Maybe this is also a limitation, because we didn't really ask the parents if they had impairment. This came across when we had to use sign language for the parents to be able to complete the questionnaires. So we did not know if other parents might have had also an impairment, but I think it was more frequent in the hearing impaired group.
And that's of course has this impact on identity and so.
Definitely.
Definitely. Other questions as well? 1, 2, yeah. So maybe you can change chairs. Yeah, Andres, and then
You can already sit there. That's faster.
As een stage, een floor manager.
I love this chair game.
Er zijn heel veel mensen eigenlijk, dat weet je nog niet.
Go ahead.
So my question is about, you were talking about stigma and family stigma and how families themselves can also internalize stigma about disability, but it pertains to themselves. But I'm also curious about families adopting stigma towards the family member that has a disability. So, for example, parents or siblings or uncles or aunts that actually reproduce or actively contribute to the stigmatization of the person with disability. And also because you were talking about participation as one way of sort of battling the stigma or fighting the stigma. What are the limits of that, especially in this kind of case where a person with disability has experienced stigma from within a family system, within all sorts of their social networks? To what extent can participation really alleviate stigma when it's that sort of systemic?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I think definitely we can see it didn't come across in these specific studies because we didn't examine it, but I think in general we do know that in families, if we look at families as part of the general community and the fact that they are aware of the stigma that is happening in the community, then of course naturally many of these parents hold their own perceptions and their own stigma before having had a child being born to the family who has a disability. So they already have a frame of mind of what it means to have a disability. And I think it depends on what types of relationships. For example, if the sibling is older or the sibling is younger, if the sibling has all his life known he's the younger sibling and has known the sibling with a disability all of his life, or the sibling with a disability being born afterwards and after the child already knows a lot of things that he's learned from the community. Specifically in Israel, we hear a lot about this in the ultra-Orthodox community. In the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel, there is shidduch, I forget the word in English, marriage.
Mediator, matchmaker.
Matchmaker. A matchmaker. So this comes up a lot, of course, because if you're about to get married and someone is meeting potential spouses for you, do you disclose that you have a sibling with a disability, or do you not disclose that you have a sibling with disability? Is there a fear that this disability can go, if it's genetics, it can go to your side of the family or not? And we see many, many times what impact it might have. We were doing a different study that had to do with CF, cystic fibrosis, and we saw there a lot of hiding, a lot of not disclosing the disability. And we interviewed a spouse. The husband had a cystic fibrosis, and the daughter, and they were not telling the family, the wife's family, they were not disclosing that the husband had CF. Until the daughter was the one that disclosed. She was about 4 years old, and the husband was in the room, and he was doing inhalations that comes with CF. And she runs down to the grandparents and she says, "Dad is doing something in the room. It's the thing that no one knows, and the thing that no one has to know what he's doing in the room, but he's doing it now what no one should know." So this is she disclosed right there when they were spending the weekend, but it's a lot of issues that have to do with being the matchmaker, and should you say something or should you not say something, and it happens across the board with disability as well. So I think that naturally it also accompanies families, but we also know from a theory that stigma is lower when you know someone personally who has a disability. So when it's a friend or someone in the family, it has the ability to lower stigma.
Yeah, but sometimes it doesn't, I think.
Depends.
Especially with parents, I find that some parents have higher stigma.
Towards themselves or towards the child?
towards other people with disabilities sometimes?
I think what we might also see, and this is also a question, when we speak about disability, we're not speaking about like a large group. And sometimes we see that people with X disability might still hold stigmatic opinions about Y disability, and people with Y disability might hold a stigmatic about this other disability. And this may be part of the intersection.
It relates to disability hierarchy, I think.
Yeah.
But what I was talking about is that sometimes I find that parents, because of their care relation to their child, they treat other people with disabilities, grown-ups, as if they are
their
their
children,
child.
yeah.
Because they take the care
Perspective.
perspective
Yeah.
towards other people with the disability. So I sometimes find that parents of children with a disability are even worse than somebody who has never seen a disabled person in his life.
But parents
Same
also,
as the professional
Caretaker.
yeah.
But parents also consider their child to be continuously a child.
Yes.
Also when
Eternal,
the child is 50.
Yeah. Yes.
But just like the second part of the question, because so to me it's very much possible, and I've seen this as well, is that for people with disabilities to participate either socially or politically, they can participate and still the stigma will be reproduced within the participation by other participants. So you are participating, or you are being included, so to speak, but then within that inclusive process, people still reproduce stigma. Or so I'm unsure in your presentation how does participation relate to sort of decreasing or eliminating stigma.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of questions about participation, because when we look at participation, a lot of times people look at physical participation, okay? And I think this comes across in the academic study. I'm physically part of the course. I'm studying and I'm here and I'm sitting with you. But does this mean I'm really included? I'm really part of the course? Or does this mean I'm just sitting beside you and you're okay with me sitting beside you? And I think what you're saying, and I think it's true, that we must like tear apart participation. Is it just physical? Are you also an active part in this? Are you actually accepted as part of the group, or you're just okay to be?
Of your participation.
What's the cost of your participation?
Yeah, for the person themselves.
Energy-wise.
Yeah, for instance, or because there is harassment that no one sees but what is there, or exclusion practices within the participation.
Right. I think that happens a lot, and you're participating, and like what it was said about the parents, you're participating, but do people come in and help you when you didn't ask for it? Or do people answer the questions for you? Or I don't know, can give many different examples, but how are you really accepted there?
There was an interesting study of Edward Hall in the United Kingdom on the exclusion that.
Oh, you are not in the image, I think.
Bogus isn't in the image.
Oh,
Yeah,
I have
so-
to see. I should have stayed there.
Sorry to interrupt.
Maybe you can speak up.
Is it better?
He's still out of the frame, so if you can just push a little bit closer, that would be very good. Okay, well.
See, we're participating.
Yeah.
Better?
Yeah, this is a super wide angle lens, but it's not like that wide angle, so it works good. Yeah.
Go ahead.
The study of Edward Hall in the United Kingdom on the exclusive, how do you say that? The exclusion that comes along, the collateral damage in inclusion practices, which was eye-opening to me, but also very recognizable. So people are included in a job, and everybody thinks, well, check, that's done, and nobody knows that colleagues don't want to assist in things. So the person doesn't go for the lunch because nobody will give the needed assistance to go to lunch or whatever. The exclusion in the sense of people damaging their health to be able to keep up and stay in the labor market, for instance.
and not being able to go to the bathroom or to do other things that their body needs. So, and I find it quite interesting what he writes about that.
Right. It's very interesting, and I think it's important to be looking into all of these aspects, because I think it's not, the overall aim might be, I don't know, to be in the labor market. Okay, it might be but it's not just this, it's a lot of things that must be met along the way, and even if this is one aim to achieve this, there are a lot of needs along the way that must be met.
That's what he says, this Edward Hall. So, like, if we talk about participation, it's about paid labor, it's about living independent, and it's about a sort of very non-specific, specified social interaction. But it's mostly the first two.
I think there is also a big question mark of what living independently means.
Yeah, that's what he says. It's we don't know, but they know.
They out there.
Policy knows. But I had a different question, but I think that you had.
Yeah, well, my questions keep piling up as I'm sitting here. No, I was wondering, you mentioned the students who kind of like replied in maybe a way they thought they had to reply, but basically their reactions were different, so they were still kind of like maybe reacting based on public stigma or the ideas they had, the stereotypes. And I was wondering, so in that way, participation can become harming. So how can we work on this public stigma? And personally, I am working on representation. I don't know if that's, I think that's a big part of it, but what are other kind of like ways to kind of work on public stigma and the distribution of it?
I think for me the difficulty was, as you said before, that people were answering as they were expected to be. I'm an occupational therapist and this is who I am and this is what it means to me. And in my mind, I don't know, it might sound bad, but I would have actually wanted to hear more of what you truly think, because to become a better occupational therapist, you must become, first of all, aware of what you're bringing in with you. And even when you do see someone as your client, I want you to first see him as a person. And he's not just your client, he might become your client, but you might work jointly together. And it was difficult for me to hear all of these two positive thoughts, because I want you to, I think it's difficult to change things if you don't admit first to things, okay? You first have to say, these are the thoughts that come to my mind, and I'm able to bring up these thoughts. But how to change it, I think it's very complicated. It's very, very complicated, and I don't think it's one thing. I think it has to be representation. I think it has to be ongoing contact. It cannot be this one course that people came in and they go out. It has to be ongoing course. It has to be that you go to, it has to be that people are just coming into regular credit courses and you meet people as your peers that are sitting next to you in class, and each one with their different abilities. And it's not easy, but I just think it's something that needs to be in every field of life.
And so, but then of course we study always a smaller part and then try to kind of like work from there. And I was also, I've two more things.
But you are allowed one, because we are waiting for Jacqueline as well, and I'm keeping an eye on the clock.
What's your name?
Oh, my name is Brechtla Meres and I'm from the Open University here.
Oh, now I recognize your face.
Yeah.
I was looking at you all the time. I know her.
Yeah. Just one brief.
Yeah.
Because we, of course, organize distant teaching. And I was wondering, is the empowering thing about the fact that you do this education or that you are in this group? Because as Open University, we can offer distant teaching, where the maybe negative effects of participation, or the forcing yourself to go into a classroom, even though maybe your disability kind of like makes that difficult for you, would be kind of like overcome in a way.
Yeah, for some people it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I will now.
Thank you.
Then we have an empty chair in the image.
I think the thing about distance teaching is interesting on itself, and we see this from COVID. On the one hand, the opportunities that came in, and the other hand, the prices that came in. And I think it's not one solution, because people have different needs and people have different accessibility needs, different wishes. Some want to come physically to class and find it easier to participate. Some people, I know a lot of people with autism, just as an example, were very happy about the possibility, they don't have to come with a place that might raise their social anxiety, and they can study, and it's a much easier way for them to study. I'm saying them, but really it should be each individual person of what the specific
plus the possibility to study in your own pace.
Right, right, definitely, definitely.
Okay. So, last question.
Last question. Next question.
Not the last, but the last for now.
Last for now, maybe. Well, it's building upon the conversation that we had before the questions of Brecht on what is participation? Is it within the broader society, or is it also in a sort of in-group? What is in my mind recently a lot is the question, what does it mean for people, and maybe also for families, to be in interaction with others with similar life situations, slash what can the meaning be of being part of a disability community? And it's not so much as a question to you as more maybe an issue that other people can reflect on too. But recently I had a conversation with a few people who are joining in my research about how do you live with a body that's obvious has some disabilities. And what struck me is that several people mentioned the importance of suddenly becoming aware that there is something like a disability community in helping them to see themselves and the disability in a totally different way. So I was thinking, could that be something we should be more aware of? And how do families, as you say, some families have a more social approach or a rights approach towards their child or to disability in general. Where do they get it from, and how can we maybe in a sort of more peer meetings or being part of a disability community can be helpful?
Maybe you can reflect first.
Yeah.
And then if others can, if there's time. Yeah, Mogus can join as well. Yeah, but
Okay.
Shirley goes first.
Okay. I love the part about advocacy, both for people with disabilities and for family advocacy groups, because sometimes I feel, for me, I'm changing between the hats that I hold, between the hat of a researcher and the hat of a parent with someone with disability, and the hat of actually I can change with the hat of a parent advocacy. My daughter is in a teenagers advocacy group, very active.
Oh, right.
But I'm actually not very active in the parent hat advocacy, except for myself. But I'm always, I don't know if I should say surprised, but I feel that many parents are not speaking the disability rights language.
No.
They're not.
No.
And
That's true.
And sometimes, I'm saying, how can you, but this is the language they hear from professionals, and if you're not specifically in the field or specifically in advocacy, you learn the language of some of the professionals that might be medicalized,
individualized,
and this is what you hear. Many of the professionals that I've met along the way, I've been telling them, because I've been in the disability field before my daughter was born. But now it tells, when I get these in the personal experiences, just sure you know, so you know, I'm going to be bringing you into my class. I'm going to tell my students what you just told me. This is a perfect example of what shouldn't be done, and this is going to go back to my students. And the parents are not speaking this language, which it's shameful for me. Like I would have want them to do a bit more of a standing up for yourself and for your child and for.
And it also helps probably against this stigma issue that we're talking about.
Sometimes I hear, you know, parents are not standing up for their rights, and you know, they took my kid into class. I can't ask for anything more than that, you know. What can I say? They were willing to take him. How can I ask for more?
Willing to take.
Host us, was in one of your slides.
Yeah, but also you actually showed that if a family has another approach,
it works.
It works.
It works.
So,
that's from
so this community is very important to educate people about.
Yeah, so Mogus, tie in.
Okay, thank you. Just my question related with the family stigma. What tools do we have to measure, to know the family stigma impact? We use SARI, this SARI stigma scale, just we ask the persons affected or the disabled person. But is there any tool we address the family stigma?
I can send this to you if you wish, if you write me an email. We use in this study, we used the FAMSI, and it was Katrina Sior, my colleague from UCL, and one of her students that have a nice scale because it has both of a family stigma part, which is one I presented here, but it has also a section on internalized stigma, and it also divides into the cognitive aspects, the affective, and the behavioral aspects. So I think it's a nice scale. The other scale that is available is called the affiliate stigma scale. It was originally in Chinese, the original scale. We had difficulty with in Israel because the Israeli folks, it's a difficult scale. It deals with how you feel about your child, and it's a very negative worded scale, and the families in Israel were very mad at us for asking them these questions. And when I spoke with Winnie Mack from Hong Kong, she said, you know, we didn't have any trouble in China. Anyone would complete the scale, but in Israel it was. So I think it also has to do with different cultures and what scales go. So the affiliate is more of the internalized stigma aspects in this scale. Like I feel shameful as a parent, and these types of aspects. If you write to me, I can send you whatever I have available.
Thank you. Do you think that this SARI scale associated with the family?
I don't think I'm familiar with it. I need to see it. Not.
But maybe you mentioned that in that skill there are several aspects that you have told us this afternoon as well, and that also were brought forward in the several questions. So it is public stigma awareness creation is very important, education, contact. So the study you showed about branding academic course tied into that. So I think representation we have covered. So it's lots that talking about intersectionality. It's also intersections of various, I think, maybe interventions, to use that word. But the very important thing for me, at least, that you mentioned when we were talking about developing and developed countries, so that ties to in it as well, that colonialism, or how you want to phrase it, but that is that if we could start from scratch, which we cannot, obviously, but if we were able to do so, then we were able to mitigate for many of the troubling issues we were discussing today.
I think that's very naive.
But
I think that we are in our brains are biased in several ways. And that
but I mean, I would like to end it here.
Okay.
Because I think if even your brain, if it, maybe it's too naive to assume a grand reset, and we cannot do that. I totally agree. But the what I would like to say is that if we are aware of what we are talking about today, and if we could make use of all the several concepts and tie in them together, yeah, that is what disability studies does and is studying. And yeah, I'm glad that you were our guest today from the Center of Disability Studies in
Thank you so
Israel.
much.
Yeah, so thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you. And bye everyone at home. And maybe you can end it now, Jane.